For the physical, is always some definite and particular type of thing. It is always in a moment of time, and therefore an abstraction of a process that led to its existence. Okay? So there's a process that led to a result, and this result is this limited abstraction from a process beyond it that led to it, that the result is only a mere instance of, and that instance solidified as an object, as the thing. But this object as a thing was brought about by a process more fundamental, or rather greater than it, that led to its being. And this process itself is not just any object. It's rather the relation between objects, their ultimate interaction. And this is the problem with atomism. Hegel critiques atomism on the ground that it's a purely quantitative analysis and measure of something that's not just quantitative, of some quality. You see, you can't just provide a quantitative description of a quality, because a quality requires explanation in and of itself. You can't just quantitatively measure it without describing what it is. And that was the critique of atomism, because the atom is always used as a unit of measure to disclose an energy state, okay, or disclose some quality. Now, if you ask, well, what is this atom that is used as a unit of measure to disclose some quality? The modern scientists say, oh, well, knowing the nature of the atom not need be important to derive its utility. We don't need to know what the nature of the atom is in order to derive some function from its utility. We can still use it even if we don't know what it is. I can still use this thing as a unit of measure to confine in that unit of measure an area of space. Within that area of space, there is a quality. But you can't use that as a true ontological theory. Because in order to be a sound and a valid ontological theory, you have to describe the nature of being. And therefore you're not describing the nature of being. You're not satisfying the very first premise in order to be a true ontological theory about the nature of the universe. That's correct. You see, that's the idea. It's 100% correct. You see, that's reality. It's interacting with your consciousness, because your consciousness is in this reality. And so, not to digress and diverge from the topic, whatever the topic may be, let's remain on understanding why the nature of the atom failed in providing a sound description of the nature of being. It's because it tries to measure being by not describing it, by not requiring to describe being, and yet we still have to measure what it is. So you have this atom, and we don't need to know what the nature of the atom is in order to use it, in order to derive some utility out of it. So, okay, we don't know the nature of the atom, but we're still using it in order to measure things in the world. Now, the problem with atomism, Hegel says, is that it develops an infinite regress. So if we ignore one stage in the use of the atom as a unit of measure of things, we're still left with the question that we delegated away from needing an answer, which is, well, what are those qualities? What are those things then that are being disclosed within the atom? And if there are things that cannot be described that an atom discloses, then their lack of description makes them necessarily more fundamental than the atom which discloses them. And so the atom therefore has fundamental components that are not describable and lack a description, and therefore we do not have a fundamental basis of the components that make an atom up, especially if we don't know in the first place what an atom is. But an atom is this area that confines within it qualities. What are those qualities? Well, the atom cannot answer, it can only measure it. Okay, what is it measuring? The atom is measuring these qualities, and these qualities are defined as a set of internal relation, as a sequence of possible interactions. There is a set of interactions occurring between indeterminate components, and we don't know what the components are, or rather the components are just mere measures of the process itself, of the interaction itself. It's an instantaneous flashing of a discrete point, and these instances of the discrete point themselves are themselves objects, and they are the measures of the process which gives rise to those abstractions of itself. And so the atom is always this spherical sphere of energy, and within it disclosed interactions, or we could say an electron, a proton, and a photon, and these are just different states that are occurring to components that share an indivisible relation. A, by being abstractions of that relation as a process, and B, that process itself bearing instance of itself as objects, as these abstractions. And so they're flickering in and out, and the total interaction, we can say the actual measure of their total interaction is determined by the sum set of their possible interactions. And this is where logic intimately and necessarily comes in as a supplementary science to any physically crude science. And the logic supplements the crude science by ultimately making the physical science, which is without rationality, a dead abstraction, and with rationality, a living, real being, or a thing, or we say it's a rational thing, a thing with a reason and a description, and it does something with the capacity for it to be described and understood by any external observer. And so it's rational. It's a rational process. It's not just an endlessly aimless process. And so there are these set of components interacting with each other in an indefinite set of numerable ways. And when these interactions become definite and set, they become states that we can characterize as an electron, a proton, or a neutron. And ultimately, these states themselves take on a different physical manifestation. Like the electron is it's the most elusive and the least dense and the most active and indeterminate part of the atom. It's always going the furthest away from every other component, and it's the least discernible, the least able to be predicted, and the most discrete, meaning it's the rate at which it enters and exits out of being occurs the highest amount of times within the short period the highest number within the short period of time. And so it's constantly going in and out of existence instantaneously. The existence of coming in and out of existence is simultaneously occurring. I mean, the proton ultimately is a more concentration of that into either in or out of being, as the law of non-contradiction solves the problem of identity. The problem of identity is that P is equal to P. A thing is always first itself before it's anything else. But what is itself? That is the problem. It's undefined, and therefore enters into a contradiction, which is actually the law of difference, the law of opposition, where the thing being itself and non-itself, or if it is itself and therefore has no measure of its, or it's not defined as itself, therefore develops a lack of identity or a non-version of itself, and that non-description of itself being not what it is, and what itself having no description yet, and therefore needing to be explained, both constitute the law of non-contradiction, that a thing either has to be or not be. You can't be and not be at the same time. In other words, you have to be at one point or not be at another point, and both can be occurring simultaneously at the same time while still being themselves. They need to either be each other or not each other. And so the neutron is this neutral field, this substrate which endures this interaction. Or in other words, in logic, it's the excluded middle. A thing cannot be and not be while still being the other version of itself. Either the proposition is true, or its opposite, the negation, is true. Either something is true, or if it is false, then it being false is a true fact about it.